Welcome to The More Perfect Union, a podcast about the joy we get from American politics, or as we like to call it, real debate without the hate. Hello, I'm Kevin Kelton. I am a moderate Democrat from Los Angeles, California.
Hi there, I'm DJ McGuire, a conservative Democrat from Suffolk, Virginia.
I'm Cliff Dunn, a Republican from Newport News, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kushmiter, a liberal Democrat from Kensington, Maryland.
Hi, I'm Molly Malloy Cooper, a conservative Catholic from Columbus, Ohio.
I love how that always has alliteration in it. And with over 500,000 downloads to date, everybody, yes, we passed the 500,000 mark this week. So the More Perfect Union podcast is definitely one of the fastest growing political podcasts on iTunes. The More Perfect Union can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and also at our website, moreperfectunionpodcast.com, where you can also find host bios and commentaries. And remember to check out our midweek More Perfect Union After Dark podcast, where we take you behind the scenes to hear what we chat about once the official podcast has ended. So this week was the mother of all weeks when we got to see the United States military drop the mother of all bombs on the mother of all tunnels against the mother of all bad guys. Who wants to field this one first? The United States military attack against ISIS in Afghanistan.
Well, you know what? I heard this headline. I was out and about and someone texted me, hey, we just bombed Afghanistan, and I had to check the year. Because the last time I remember hearing about that was, 10, 12 years ago. It's been a while since bombing Afghanistan was news.
Yes, when they said attacked ISIS in Afghanistan, I really did a spit take. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know that ISIS was in Afghanistan. Did you guys?
I certainly didn't know that they were living in an underground bunker that conspiracy theorists tell me now is full of gold and oil and ponies, maybe unicorns, the really rare Pokemon in Pokemon Go.
And skeletons of dead CIA agents from the 1980s. I was aware that Daesh had moved to Western Pakistan. I didn't know that they had bled into Eastern Afghanistan, but it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, Daesh was essentially Al-Qaeda in Iraq before their leaders got into an argument with Ayman al-Zawahiri. So, it doesn't surprise me that they are wherever Al-Qaeda is or was.
So wait, are you telling me radical separatists often radically separate from one another?
Indeed, they do.
I am shocked by that news.
This is not the People's Front of Judea.
It's the
Judean People's Front.
Splitters!
That's a Monty Python reference, right?
Of course
Yes.
it is.
Yes.
Joking aside, though, Daesh has been franchising as if they were McDonald's. They, obviously they have their core territory in Western Iraq, Eastern Syria, but they've also had affiliated groups in Nigeria, Libya, and as DJ mentioned, Pakistan/Afghanistan. So they're sort of all over the place in the disorganized parts of the world, and I suspect we will see, quote-unquote, affiliates showing up elsewhere as time goes on, even if those are self-declared affiliates.
God, it's going to be like the America's Got Talent competition. Europe's got talent. Daesh's got talent. Nigeria, Daesh has talent.
Yes, they're going to have an annual beheading contest.
Sorry, I've eaten a lot of chocolate today. I'm a little loopy.
Does anybody feel that President Trump and his military advisors were wrong in either using this particular bomb or in the way they managed this? Or are we all on board of he's the commander-in-chief, they say they needed to do it, they say this was the right weapon, we're going to support him?
How I come at this, and as an economist, might be a bit different. But what I've seen from some of my more liberal friends is this hand-wringing over this bomb is such a waste because we could have, solved the Flint water crisis, which for me is a wonderful opportunity to explain the concept of sunk cost.
Sunk cost.
Yes, exactly. So
that's the one thing I learned from my economics course at Ohio State University. See?
Very good, Rebecca.
So if they were going to ignore the sunk cost, then what are they saying? That we should have dropped this bomb on Flint?
Hey now.
Oh my. Wow.
Send your letters to Cliff Dunn, Dunn,
what Molly's saying is that the money is spent on this bomb. That money's gone. It's not like we can reallocate the money that we spent building this bomb to solve the Flint water crisis. We have to get new money for that. This exists in the form it is. What I take it to understand is that the generals had asked for some sort of action on this particular area to do something to this bunker a while back, and maybe I don't know if they requested this bomb in particular, but I'm betting that there are a lot of white guys in uniforms who think this bomb was awfully freaking cool and they were psyched to use it. Not that means they shouldn't have used it, but come on, let's be real. When my neighbor got the opportunity to use his chainsaw for the first time, he was chainsawing the fallen trees in everyone's yard, not just his own.
Right. So I'm going to go with the smoke 'em if you got 'em, which is kind of a corollary to the if it feels good, do it foreign policy of Donald
Actually, I think
Trump.
it's the follow-up to if it feels good, do it, then smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Well, he certainly smoked him.
Yeah, he did smoke him. So go ahead, Molly. What was your point?
Well, so, I mean, that was my point exactly, is that, we had this in our arsenal, and, that it's the mother of all bombs. It's messaging. It's, this is what we can do to your tunnel system. And, oh, by the way, North Korea, did you see what we did over there?
Okay, so here's my concern about this week. I generally, no pun intended, I support what the president did. But I'm a little queasy about it for this reason. Apparently, this is the largest non-nuclear bomb ever used in battle. Am I incorrect in that, or is that what everybody understands?
As I understand,
it's largest single device, yes.
That's how it's marketed.
Okay, so here's my concern. My problem is, the United States already has the reputation of having been the only nation to ever use a nuclear device in battle. Hopefully that won't change. Hopefully we will be the only nation, and that will be the only instance in World War II. But now we have escalated the arms race in the non-nuclear area. We have introduced a new, larger weapon, conventional weapon, into the battlefield. And doesn't that kind of move the arms race once again? Doesn't that say to other countries, you now have to start developing larger bombs, maybe alternative ways of attacking physical assets? Isn't this escalating the arms race in another way?
The arms race is not the issue. The issue is the people who have control over the armaments. It's not about the weapons, it's about the people who wield them. And the fact of the matter is, most of the queasiness about the use of this weapon is not about the weapon itself, but, understandably, about the president who is wielding it right now. Do you really think, Kevin, and I ask you honestly, if Harry Truman dropped the mother of all bombs in World War II, would you really be upset about it? Or is it just because it's
Henry
this
Wallace
president?
Be bitching up a storm.
Well, of course he is, but I'm not asking Henry Wallace. I'm asking Kevin.
Well, my answer is, I'm going to go back to my original point, DJ, because I do disagree with you, frankly. Yes, I am not as concerned that England and France have nuclear weapons as I am that Pakistan, India, and North Korea do. But I still think that this is escalating what you want to call it, the arms race. You want to call it just an escalation of military might. We have increased the level of conventional weaponry being introduced into conventional battles. And regardless of, the fact that ISIS is one of the most evil enemies that we have ever incurred, I am still concerned that this may have unintended consequences in other places.
Well, let's talk about North Korea for a moment, since we're talking about North Korea for a moment. I was just reading that they had some anniversary of something,
105th anniversary of the grandfather's birth.
Right.
And
right.
so
it would have been his 105th birthday if he had eaten an egg every day, like that lady in
like
Italy.
the lady but they did a parade where they literally were rolling their bombs through the streets on big old bomb hauling carts or whatever the heck you use to move bombs around. And there was a good analysis in the Post of what each of these weapons was and if they were real and what the validity and what does this say about their program technologically. And in some ways, I wonder, would that benefit Trump if he could just wave his bombs around, like have parades? Would he not feel the need to then blow them up somewhere? and to show them that way. I mean, because if this was a message, it seems like a parade would have been a slightly cheaper and less impactful on civilians kind of way of doing it. But
the thing over the last few weeks that I think we're seeing is an attempt to signal very clearly to North Korea that not only do we have the shiny toys that look weirdly phallic, we are also prepared to
weirdly phallic.
Yeah, we also have we are also inclined to use them, because remember the Soviets had those parades where they would roll bombs down the street, and in fact they would often roll them around the block a couple of times to inflate the apparent count. For everybody, there was a famous.
They are the country that invented the Potemkin village, so that sort of deception should be no surprise. Sorry.
Okay, but what I was going to say is, with what happened in Syria a couple weeks ago, with what's happening in Afghanistan, it seems to me that there's a very clear attempt to telegraph to the Chinese that they really need to, I will just say, get their dog under control.
So, this kind of goes back to Kevin's point from a few moments ago about, whether this escalates and with the weaponry. And again, these bombs on display did not get, made last week, or they did not get made since January 20th. I mean, these have been, in the works, and, there is an attempt, although fortunately so far a failed attempt by North Korea to escalate with their weaponry.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like North Korea has the best scientists and the best tacticians in the world on speed dial. This is a pretty isolated country. They're working with limits. So they could try and have an arms race, but it wouldn't be. It's not going to be the same as the Soviet arms race. Where
but North Korea is not as isolated as you think, and I think this is a large part of the problem. And we saw this. There's an article in Politico about this today that talks about the fact that every time Washington throws its eye towards North Korea and North Korea's weapons program, including its nuclear program, it notices, oh, by the way, it gets financing from Chinese banks. It gets material from Chinese companies. It asks Beijing what the hell is going on. And Beijing's response is essentially their first response is like the murder in all those detective mystery shows. Oh, you can't prove it. And then when we do prove it, they go, oh, well, we'll promise to do a little better at watching them. Please don't punish us for it. And we fall for it every time. Bill Clinton fell for it. George Bush the Younger fell for it. Barack Obama fell for it. Donald Trump is falling for it by letting Xi Jinping walk him down the primrose path, giving him a 10-minute lecture on Chinese North Korean history that was probably all bullshit to begin with, pardon my language. Because the fact of the matter is, you can't believe anything that a Chinese communist says, ever at all, period. Especially when they tell you they want to help with North Korea. They don't want to help with North Korea at all, or else they would actually do something to police their own businesses, their own banks, which are run by their own Communist Party members. They would police them and stop them from helping North Korea's missile program. They don't want to do that because North Korea is a useful tool for them against us. And until we
need to have DJ giving Trump lessons in North Korea Chinese history instead of letting the Chinese do it.
Well, I wish that were possible. But in lieu of that,
come on.
In lieu of that, let me ask you guys this serious question. Does Trump have a play here? I keep hearing all our options are on the table, which every president has said since probably JFK and maybe even earlier than that. But what options really are on the table, and is there anything he really can do to in some way inhibit them from developing their nuclear program?
I gotta first take issue with the all options are on the table. I mean, President Obama was constantly telling us we're not going to send in ground troops and telling us what he would not do. And that is a shift in policy. Now, it may not be a new one and certainly goes, back through several presidents. But at this particular time, it is a shift from the last president to the current president.
Okay, so back to the current. Does Trump have a play?
Oh, God, no.
Yes.
But no, well, I mean, yeah, sure, there are things he can do, but I don't. He doesn't strike me as a long-term thinker. Hopefully, someone in the Pentagon is, but I don't think. Trump.
Well,
right. His play is that I am now letting the generals decide. I am deferring.
But what is the play?
What's the play, Cliff?
Secondary sanctions against Chinese corporations. That's the play that has to come out.
If that was the play, and that's a good play, wouldn't he have done it by now? Why hasn't he done that? And don't give me that he's
why
only been there
haven't the
long
last
enough.
3 or 4 presidents done it?
Well, because they were idiots on this policy.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is a trade war, to instigate a trade war in order to motivate the Chinese to do something about North Korea. That seems kind of not a straight line to me.
That is an oversimplification, Kevin.
It is.
Okay, a secondary sanction is where what you say is, hey, Bank X or Company X, if you're doing business with Group Y that we don't like, we're going to cut you off from American markets. You've seen this with respect to Iran on a number of occasions where the U.S. has basically said to foreign banks, you can choose to do business with Americans or you can choose to do business with Iranians. Take your pick. Right. And you've had some banks out there that have said, well, we'll do business with Iran. A lot will say, we'd rather do business with the U.S. So you turn to China and say, well, the Commerce and Industry Bank or whatever it is, you have to choose. Do you want to be making these loans to North Korea or would you like to be able to do business with Americans?
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And I would love to see Trump do that. He hasn't done it yet. He had plenty of time to do it. And I don't think he will do it because I think the fact of the matter is he has not surrounded himself with anybody, in my opinion, who has the understanding of the Chinese Communist Party to even recommend that sort of stuff to him. He has surrounded himself with the same kind of people that all previous administrations have. They have engagement on the brain. They drink the engagement Kool-Aid and they say, oh, well, we have to be nice to Beijing. We don't have to be nice to Beijing. There are many things we can do even beyond the sanctions issue. We can threaten switching diplomatic recognition of Taipei. We can say that we recognize an independent Tibet. We can say that we recognize an independent East Turkestan. Hell, we can even mention the words East Turkestan in the Chinese presence, and that will wake them up. Because they don't ever want to hear those 2 words. At all, ever.
You're giving Donald Trump a lot of credit for knowing what East Turkestan is.
Oh, he doesn't know any of this stuff. That's the problem. He's not going to do any of this because he doesn't know what it is.
Let me ask a follow-up question to my question of, is there a play? If there is a play, what dessert should the President of the United States be having when he decides on it?
He should have it with some Chianti and fava beans.
So you're saying that the chocolate cake was not intimidating enough? The beautiful, most beautiful chocolate cake you've ever seen? That wasn't intimidating enough?
No, but it was amazing.
I like something that involves like a blowtorch or like Cherry's Jubilee or my personal favorite, the creme brulee. So
yeah, no, the Cherry's Jubilee is a really good idea, Molly. I could see that as being very intimidating. You know who likes a good creme brulee?
Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah?
That was in one of her emails, in the very scandalous emails. There was one where she invited Huma Abedin out to go get a creme brulee. They were going to split it.
With or without the hot sauce?
That brings us to a
she
great
did not
transition.
mention that.
That brings us to a great transition, which is going back to the campaign of 2016. Anybody here remember it? Donald Trump said a lot of things that he has since flip-flopped on. And I'm not going to list them here because I think you guys know them well. Who wants to start on their favorite flip-flop? What's your favorite Trump flip-flop so far?
NATO. It is so clear. Yes, he has clearly thought that NATO was some sort of dues entity that you paid into, and he has learned that that's not what it is. He's probably maybe learned when it started and why, and he said that NATO was obsolete back in the debates, but now he's saying that even though they were obsolete, they're not obsolete anymore, and I have decided that temporary obsolescence will be the name of my new emo band.
I love that quote from him because it is just so enigmatic of what is wrong with this man's thinking. Something does not go from being obsolete to no longer obsolete. If something is obsolete, it is dead. It is over. It doesn't come back.
It's
and the idea that he could stand there behind a podium of the presidential seal and say, I said NATO is obsolete, it's no longer obsolete, just shows what a shallow thinker he is.
No, it shows that he's an idiot, that he's got no sense of history and he doesn't know basic facts. The guy shouldn't be president.
Kevin, I do want to take exception with your idea that something can cease to be obsolete. A good example is you had a lot of programmers whose skills were quote-unquote obsolete until everybody realized that the Y2K problem was in fact a bug, and suddenly all these guys, their skills were no longer obsolete because they needed to fix those bugs.
Yeah, well, they're obsolete now.
And I saw something on TV about how like people that can like line up like old film are kind of like coming back in to try to like convert everything to widescreen on TV. So, there's
then
that
they
too.
weren't obsolete. They were just dormant.
But maybe NATO was dormant until it changed its focus from something like global warming to global terrorism.
Yes, and let's go tell that to the Chancellor of Germany. So, going on, what other flip-flops should we talk about? There's the XIM Bank.
That's the one that bothers me, the Export-Import Bank. Because, and I'll explain, well, one, I hate the Export-Import Bank. So that's part of the reason. It raises prices for domestic goods here in this country. It encourages exports in a way that should not be encouraged. It's essentially an export subsidy, the worst kind of trade intervention that is out there of all the bad ones. And there are no good ones, by the way.
Why?
It is the worst kind because it essentially raises the prices for all of the goods that are exported by subsidy, and thus it is worse for American consumers across the board. It creates inflation here at home, all for exports that would not have occurred had it not been for the export subsidy. Those are things that could have been consumed here at home, and say they're consumed abroad, and those of us here at home have to consume those goods at higher prices. If they involve inputs, which in the case of the XM Bank, it definitely does because it mostly helps Boeing sell planes abroad. It damages American airlines such as Delta Airlines, who have been complaining about the XM Bank's effect for years. They do the right thing. They go to Congress. They complain. They don't throw passengers off their flights, and they still get screwed by the Export-Import Bank every single year. But the thing is also politically, this was one of those issues that divided the outsiders from the establishment within the Republican Party for at least the last 3 to 4 years. Jeb Hensarling led a wonderful fight against it in Congress. I won't get into the details because I don't want to bore people. But my point is, when Donald Trump said he opposed the Export-Import Bank in 2016, it helped establish him as the outsider. It helped establish his outsider brand. And now he's essentially saying it was all BS. And some of us figured it was all going to be BS, but the brazenness with which he's saying, ha ha, 2 fingers to you, as the British would say, I was fibbing all along, or as he likes to say, oh, I just changed my mind, which is a load of crap. He basically is selling out all of those people who voted for him on the assumption that he would change the country and change the Republican Party. He's made it clear with that is the symbol that shows he is going to do neither.
And there's one other flip-flop that he flipped on this week, which was Janet Yellen. He talked about draining the swamp. Molly, what do you think on that one? Should she stay as the head of the Fed? And, is she doing a good job?
Well, I mean, I think, his big complaint that he had, to the extent that he addresses monetary policy, which I can only really think of one instance, being in the, I believe it was the second debate, where he was criticizing her and the Fed more broadly for artificially holding interest rates down, and seeing as the Fed is endeavoring to raise those rates back up, which they should, just so we have, bullets in the chamber should we need monetary policy to stimulate the economy in the future. I guess that would be that, it's fine for, I think the Fed is doing overall what it needs to be doing for now. Two modest raises projected by just about everyone during the next year.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me much either.
And switching, there's so much to talk about this week. So again, just switching topics. Sean Spicer was in the news. Never a good sign for the President of the United States. And this week it was for insulting an entire religion, 6 million dead Jews, and pretty much
all of our intelligence.
Of course, we're referring to his comments about Hitler having never used chemical weapons against his people, when in fact the gas chambers were nothing but chemical weapons. What do you think?
If I recall right, did he say he'd never use them against his people or never use them in war? Because there's a nuance there.
He didn't hit the nuance.
No. He first said that even Hitler didn't use them, and then he went on to say, well, he didn't use them against innocent people, and then he really got himself into trouble.
Okay, that's a big difference.
He said he didn't use them on his own people that, as if somehow German-born Jews were not his own. It was,
Gross.
It was like he stood up there with a shovel, and he started to dig, and somebody said, Sean, what are you doing? And he dug some more. And then they said, no, really, Sean, stop digging. So he kept digging.
Yeah, the press tried to help him. So here's the thing. Okay, so clearly Sean Spicer meant to say that Hitler never dropped chemical weapons bombs on his own people in the battlefield. He just wasn't clear about what he meant. But that said, it is what it is. He is the press secretary for the President of the United States. His words matter. And then he compounded it by using phrases like Holocaust centers instead of concentration camps.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was a very large self-inflicted wound, but what I want to talk about is the response, because I was thinking about this analogy that occurred to me, is that when my kids were in elementary school, one day they sent home this very, very serious letter about a gun being brought on the school bus. Now, it was a Nerf gun, but apparently they just have one letter. So, Nerf gun, pellet gun, shotgun, it's all the same letter. And Sean Spicer, well, he had this terrible self-inflicted wound, and really, it did last for the duration of the cast itself. He didn't double down on it and say, no, really, I meant it, that of course the Jews were not his own people, or anything like that. I mean, he reversed himself rather quickly, but the response was, basically sending the same letter for a Nerf gun as they would for a real gun. Like, he must resign. This is Nancy Pelosi being out there as well as others.
Well, one thing I heard, and I'm unable to verify this, is this was an administration talking point that a couple other people did not fumble as badly. Maybe McMaster didn't fumble it. And Spicer, spoke from the paper badly, and then just, sort of deer in the headlights did. He couldn't fix it in the moment. And, and I think probably as the words Holocaust Center were leaving his mouth. Holocaust Center?
He knew he didn't know the right word. He couldn't grab it.
What am I saying? And, but he couldn't stop talking because he's the press secretary in the middle of a briefing. So
I think he probably should take an afternoon and go down to the Holocaust Museum and kind of cement things to show good faith, to cement things into his mind that maybe I should never ever ever talk about this again. That
let's face
no
it,
good can come from it.
I know for a fact he went to Catholic school in Rhode Island in the 70s and early 80s. He grew up with someone I know, so he probably wasn't getting a deep education in the Holocaust. He probably didn't identify with Anne Frank all that closely as a high schooler.
I went to a Catholic school and I read the Diary of Anne Frank like 8 times. So
right, but you're not Sean Spicer. I mean,
okay.
I'm going to go to DJ and Cliff here. Can you guys come up with a comparable goof up by a presidential press secretary putting their foot in their mouth?
Well, to be fair, Spicer has had quite.
I love when you use sound effects.
To be fair, Spicer has had quite a few. I don't know if he had anything to this disastrous extent. Nothing really jumps to mind. I don't remember George W. Bush, the elder's press secretary, during 1990 when he reversed himself on taxes, and even that would not probably reach the level of this debacle.
Marlon Fitzwater.
I don't remember him I don't remember sticking his foot in his mouth this deeply. And to be honest, what bothers me about that, in addition to what everybody else is, one other thing that bothers me is, okay, were the chemical weapons that Bashar Assad used actually used in battle? I mean, there were no rebel deployments that I'm aware of.
They were being dropped in a civilian.
They were dropped in a civilian area. They later bombed a hospital to cover up what they were doing. I mean, he basically hit civilians with this thing.
He is such a nice guy.
So, no, I don't remember any time a press secretary ate his foot and went as deep into his knee as Spicer did here.
I will say, in all fairness, I don't remember any time the press secretary has come down with this bad of a case of foot-in-mouth disease. But at the same time, I also am trying to think of any time I remember anything from a previous press secretary. They are mostly forgettable people.
This is also true.
The only one most of us remember is C.J. Craig, and she's
I was just thinking that.
I was about to say that you make yourself memorable is not a good thing in this particular job.
No, that's not what press secretary.
But he does have one of the hardest jobs in America.
Oh, he does. And he's made it harder for himself by sowing distrust. The media doesn't trust him. They will nail him to the wall on any mistake. They will let him do an entire briefing with spinach in his teeth. We've seen that. So, there's no mercy left for Sean Spicer, but man, he makes it easy to find stuff on him.
So now talking about air attacks on innocent civilians, let's segue to United Airlines.
Let's.
Salute, Kevin. Salute.
Shall we?
So, of course, this week everybody knows about the infamous video of a 69-year-old Chinese-American doctor who was dragged off of a United Airlines flight on the tarmac because they needed his seat to transport some other United Airlines personnel to wherever they were going, Memphis, I believe, and he didn't want to give up his seat. I'm sure we all think that United made a big mistake. Is there anything mitigating about this that the news has not looked at? Does anybody have a different kind of a take on this?
Well, I mean, I first was immediately reminded of times where, my little kids at time would say, I'm not going. And of course you pick them up under the arm and thankfully nobody got their face bashed in. But I did find it interesting that late this week they announced that any crew, hopping or flying would have to be checked in an hour ahead of time. I know there've been a lot of storms and I thought perhaps that maybe this was done, because the way it went down, because there was kind of like an emergency situation where they're reshuffling of flights. But the fact that, what were they doing? Sitting in the airport bar for, until the very last minute, like, oh, hey, we need to be on this flight. So that's a big question for me. But as an economist, the other thing that really fascinated me that also came out is the release now that everybody's talking about of how they had to talk about their algorithm and that, since there were indications that he may have been selected because of his race and so on and so forth. Although I wonder how much has to do with the fact that he had at one point volunteered, but then when he found out he couldn't get on a later flight that day, he took it back. I don't know. But anyway, it's supposed to be based on, how little you paid for the flight. Like if you got a super saver fare, you're kind of first in line to get bumped. And then of course, if you're like a unaccompanied minor, then they have to keep, going on down the line. And then, but I just think that, clearly, and I guess at least for a time, they will just keep upping the ante until, somebody moves on it. They'll go 800, no 900, no 10, but of course, then
Delta's willing to go to 99.50.
Well,
okay, I had heard 800, but and that they were authorized to go to 1,300.
Yeah,
I heard they're raising the cap now to 2,000 just as a response of this week.
But they didn't even go to the top.
It's interesting how no one will ever vote for a CEO salary cap, but they're very happy to cap at how much an airline passenger can be reimbursed for their flight.
Okay, there is no cap on how much an airline passenger can be reimbursed. The $13.50 cap is on mandatory IDB, involuntarily denied boarding compensation. But airlines can, and Delta often will, go above and beyond that. Now, part of the reason is that those vouchers that they give out are carried on the airline's books at a quarter of their face value because they figure people aren't going to use them. So, in theory, if they were going to pay $13.50 for a ticket in cash, to get somebody off that plane, it would behoove them to spend about $5,400 to get a voluntarily denied boarding.
But how much of this is also driven by the fact that essentially, if it is a purely domestic flight, due to regulations out of Washington, foreign airlines cannot compete for those flights. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if I understand that correctly, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong here, that essentially gives airlines here in America a de facto oligopoly on all purely domestic flights. There's no reason we should do that.
There is nothing de facto about there being an oligopoly in airlines. And, again, I mean, a few minutes ago, you said Delta did nothing wrong. I know tons of things Delta has. I mean, they are not, there's no video of them having their passengers assaulted, but in terms of, moving and, leaving passengers in the lurch.
But Molly, am I correct that, in fact, foreign airlines are effectively barred from competing for purely domestic flights in the United States?
Yes, and in fact, there's an interesting flight. It's there's a Sydney-Los Angeles JFK flight flown by Qantas. It goes both ways, and you cannot book the Los Angeles-New York leg because it's a domestic flight on a foreign airline.
But what I was going to say, as a consumer, I am finding out how much I don't know about what I'm getting when I purchase an airline ticket. And one of the things I found out is you are actually not guaranteed a seat on the flight for which you have reserved a seat. You are guaranteed a seat on a flight to your destination within a reasonable period of time from the one you reserved. But you're not actually buying a seat. You're buying transport to your destination. Maybe not right then. And the airlines do have the right to bump you. And I find it fascinating that infuriating, that we've, given airlines this kind of leeway to make decisions for us in our consumption and to change our options on us really without our consent. And I understand, while you're still in the gate area, making these changes is one thing. But once you're on the plane, like this man was, I think the rules should change a bit. It's almost what the analogy I was using was. It's like this guy was in a restaurant. They set his plate down in front of him, and then they said, "Oh wait, no, we're going to feed it to this waitress."
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
And
assuming the man had prepaid, and that struck me as absolutely bizarre.
And by the way, the airline
defend the airlines here.
Okay, well, hold on a second. United has since changed their policy so that no one who has, as of today, no one who is actually on board the plane can be removed so that another airline employee can fill that seat. Just one other thing I want to say to you, Cliff, before you continue your thought is, the next time you're talking about an airline flight that goes in and out of a hub, I suggest you use the words round trip instead of they go both ways.
I like Cliff's way better.
Go ahead, Cliff. You had a serious point.
Yeah, okay. The one thing I will say in defense of the airlines is they do need some wiggle room for down-gauge flights, for example. A good example is JetBlue has two types of planes in their fleet for all intents and purposes. One that has 200 seats, one that has 150 seats. Sometimes the 200-seater goes down and they have to substitute a 150-seater in, and so suddenly 50 people are stuck. So they need some wiggle room. But there's obviously a difference between that and I have a reserved seat. Oh, we can't transport you. The plane we said was there, that is still there. We just don't have space. Whoops!
Or you're in the space and they say we're taking it away from you. I think we all agree on that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that happened to me. They changed the configuration of the plane, and my husband and I were traveling back with a 5-month-old with rotavirus, and they had to Yes, and they had to
because a plane is the place you really want to be when that's going on.
Yes.
Too.
So they and then of course they're like, "Oh, we have to split you up," and they're like, "Oh, you have an infant. Oh, that's too bad." And it really was too bad for me and all the people around me. So.
Okay, so thanks for listening, everybody. Please follow us on Twitter at MPU Podcast and on Facebook at Facebook.com/More Perfect Union Podcast, and share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well. And if you would like to join our debate between shows, join our Facebook group, Open Fire Politics. We're all there, and we'd love to see you there too. Until next week, this is Kevin Kelton saying, anybody have a final thought?
No, I don't think.
No, we just make stuff up. And how did you put it, Cliff? Pontificate out our asses?
And I didn't know there were any donkeys on the show.